you negotiate as a real estate agent? What are our insider tips? We're going to share it all with you today. We're also going to break down the preconceived notions that might be completely off base on what makes a good negotiator or a good negotiation. Going to be some good shit. So let's unpack it. Let's start right from the beginning. Like, when I think about great negotiating, I think people have a very misconstrued idea. I think that they think that it is pulverizing the shit out of whoever is on the other end of it. And I don't know why, but people look at me and they're like, that's what you do, Mike. Like, you just beat the shit out of people when it comes to negotiating. Just send Mike Novak in. He's going to fucking get a deal. Like, that's not how I roll at all. But why is that how people think of like negotiating? It's so weird to me.
Well, number one, like, people look at you and they're like, oh, he must just scare people with his biceps. That must be it.
Arm people into signing deals.
Yeah. Like, that must be how he wins so many great deals. When the reality is, like, negotiation is very intellectual. A good negotiator is actually somebody who has a high level of emotional intelligence, who is able to posture and also find the win for both sides. Right?
Yeah.
So I think that a lot of people think that it's like the pulverizing and like the beating people down into the ground. Like, I'm such a great negotiator. And a lot of people act that way, which I'm sure we'll get into in a second. When in the reality is, like, you don't have to get emotional. You don't have to get angry. You don't have to get loud to be a good negotiator.
Yeah, no, that's a great synopsis. I love that you said that it's intellectual, because I think that actually a lot of the common myths about negotiating are very amateur-ish in nature. Like, you actually see these show up in real estate from people that don't have a fucking clue what they're doing,
totally.
Which is really weird. 100%. It's not like the people that do lots of sales that do these things. It's like the brand new guys, or, it's the guys that do like a deal here and there, and they're just kind of out of touch with how to speak to people, you know? So, one book that we read a while back, I want to just kind of put this on there for people that want to explore negotiating better, because this was one that I really loved. It was the Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. Yep. Super impactful. He was an FBI negotiator, and he really explained like his psychology of how he always was negotiating with people, right? And he was negotiating for people's lives. Nothing more valuable than that.
You're kidding.
Right? So do you remember that book?
Yeah.
And some of the stuff that he went over, like a lot of what my approach to negotiating mirrors what Chris teaches and coaches on.
Well, again, like, I mean, the point of negotiation is to find the mutual win, right? Like, obviously you want to win. You want to win for your client. Win for your client doesn't necessarily have to mean that you're pulverizing the other person, right? And that's the misconception.
Yeah, well, it's been really, I think that TV, like media, has definitely contributed to making that kind of magnified and glorifying it a little bit. They think that that's how things get done because that's what sells views and clicks.
Sure.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And then people watch this bullshit and they're like, I gotta act like that. You know what I mean? And in reality, that's not really the best way you should be thinking and acting. So one of the things that I want to put out there for you as agents is you're going to represent the buyer or the seller we're working with right now probably every like 5 to 10 years. The agent on the other end of the deal, you might see them again next week.
Exactly.
Think about that as you're considering how you speak to this person, how you treat this person, because they're actually your partner in getting this deal done, right? They are not your adversary. They are your partner.
Thank you for saying that. This is one of the reasons that we wanted, when we got into real estate and you talked me into getting back into real estate, was because we wanted to do this differently. And one of the bad reputations that real estate agents have is being petty and pulverized, like that aggressive nature, like winning over the other person and being kind of nasty. And I was like, okay, let's think about this really logically for 2 seconds. I represent the buyer, and that person represents the seller. The seller wants to sell the house to a buyer. I have a buyer who wants to buy a house from a seller. That other agent and I actually want the same thing. We are on the same team. We aren't an adversary. We legitimately have the same goal. Now, what needs to be negotiated are simply terms within that goal on that journey.
Right. You're trying to find the match, right?
Exactly.
Where do you find the match?
Exactly. So I think like that right, I'm so glad you said that, because there are so many agents that, like, we've had really tough negotiations with agents in our market, and it stayed respectful. And at the end of it, we still said, hey, like, great work. Like, you did a really good job with your client, you know, like, and there was still a mad respect for each other. And I think that's a really important thing, not just for your reputation in your market, but also for your reputation as a human anywhere, right? Like you want to maintain good relationships with people in your market because they're going to have other clients. You're going to have other clients. You're probably going to do deals together again.
Right. A while back, we kind of came up with some terms to describe our negotiating style, and I thought that they were really accurate. Firm, fair, fighter. Right. Those are the three that I felt really embodied, at least here in my style of how we try to do things. Right. Like, can you just kind of break down each of those? Like, what does firm mean?
Yeah. I mean, when you're talking about being firm in a deal or firm in a negotiation, it really is like, you have to know inside and out with your client, like what they will and will not tolerate when it comes to terms. So I know the balance of what they will accept or what they won't, but I'm going to stay pretty firm in what we're asking for because I know where they're going with it.
So being very clear.
Yeah, being very, very clear.
What about fair?
I mean, so to your point in regards to this other agent not being an adversary, like it needs to be a win. Like it needs to feel a little bit like a win for both sides. So, when I'm discussing something with, say I'm representing the buyer, if I'm discussing something with a buyer, I'm going to overstate or give them a little bit worst case scenario of what they may need to accept in order to be able to come back to the other agent and be able to negotiate something better. Like this expectation that I'm setting is going to be a little worse, and then I'm going to try to tee it up as a bigger win, right? So being fair means there's going to be a little bit of wiggle room on both sides for the seller to feel like they have a little bit of a win and my buyer to also feel like there's a little bit of a win.
Gotcha. That makes total sense. And do you think those accurately kind of describe a successful negotiation?
100%. I mean, I think that both sides need to be firm, but fair is the caveat within that firmness.
Right. And fair is how you find that win-win, right? When you find a win-lose, you might get the deal done, but it likely won't stay together. Exactly. You know what I mean? Like the person that's on the losing end is going to try to wiggle their way out of it because they know they're going to realize I've got massive remorse for what I just agreed to.
Yeah, and screwed.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Well, so what's fighter, right? Firm, fair, fighter. Is fighter pulverizing somebody?
Fighting is standing up for your client. Like there's a time and a place to do that. And I'll share with you in a little bit my kind of framework for how to do this with tact and to not just be nasty. Because I think when you do, as a real estate agent, you are the professional, right? And like almost like a lawyer going into court, we have to maintain emotional control, right? We cannot just afford to get belligerent and go off on the person. We're being paid a lot of money to remove emotion from what is happening and speak in facts.
Exactly.
Right? Super, super important. I'm going to pick on guys for a minute because some of the shit that I have heard male agents say to you would be pure fucking fighting words to me in a bar. Yeah. You come talking like that, we're fucking going outside, bitch, and it's over, right? Well, and why do men think this shit's acceptable to say to women? Like it is disgusting. It shocks me. Like I've been on like right next to you when you've got some guy talking down to you, and this is only like one or two times.
Yep.
But it was fucking shocking.
It's because there is superiority complex when it comes to particular genders. Like I'm not younger, but like as a younger in the industry, petite, short woman, it may garner a reputation to be that I am not as intelligent or I am not as capable as some men, or misogynistic men may think, oh, well, she's inexperienced, doesn't know as much, so I'm gonna be able to, like, no problem, I'm gonna be able to basically pulverize her in this negotiation. So they'll try to say things, or they have tried to say things and said things to me that I'm like, is not acceptable, right? I mean, it's, I've always looked at it personally as kind of my superpower. Like, underestimate me. That's awesome. Like, that's great for me. Because now I'm able to come out swinging, not in a bad way, but in a fighting way, right? I'm able to come out and fight for my clients and actually win because there's legitimacy and intellectualism and lack of emotion in my response to your misogyny.
And of course, the guys that did this, I mean, they're very low producing agents, right? These were not top names in our county by any stretch of the imagination, exactly. Right? So why do you think that is?
I mean, ego, 100%.
Yeah, just like way overplaying their hands, like, and I don't know why, like guys will say certain things to women they wouldn't say to other men, which is just strange to me. It doesn't make any sense.
Well, and I mean, the same goes with women. Like, women will say things to other women that they wouldn't say to men. Like, it's almost like a catty, petty kind of thing too. So all of those things, like, we're acutely aware of it. And one of the things that I think you and I have done really well is maintain a level of emotional intelligence within all of our negotiations, so that if I'm feeling condescended, or if I'm feeling like they aren't being very real, if they're not being super authentic, I'm going to be able to posture myself and my client in a different way that can either take advantage or can appeal, depending on what I need to do with that particular style of agent.
Yeah, it just cracks me up, because when I think about some of the top women I've done negotiations with, some are just total savages. Mindy Newton comes to mind. Like I've worked with Mindy before, and just like total savage. You know what I mean? Like
amazing,
full emotional control the entire time. There to fight for her client, but super fair, very firm.
Yep.
It's just like it's like a model of what great negotiating could look like. So
100%.
shout out to Mindy. For that.
Shout out to Mindy for sure.
Let's give people some very tactical things. Like, hey, I'm about to start negotiating with another agent. How am I going to play this? Right? Like. Walk us through what that could look like.
Yeah, well, number one, like putting ultimatums or absolutes has to be a no-go. Like you can't coming into negotiation saying my client will never accept that. Like
rookie move.
Yeah. Why would you say that? Okay, so where do we go from? Like, that's not helpful. That's not fair. That's not even firm.
That's like a dead end negotiation, 100%. Right? Like you've just now backed yourself into a dead end that you now can't get out of. Okay, that's not going to work. See ya. Right?
Exactly.
Now the negotiation's over. You just lost that negotiation.
You just lost the contract.
Right? So let's use this from a context. Like I'm going to go negotiate a contract with another agent, or I'm going to go negotiate an inspection request, repair, something like that. Like how do you handle things like this? Like obviously the way that you deliver information is very, very important. The way that you frame things is very important, but maybe the most important thing in my opinion is understanding what the other side wants.
Yes. I think you have, before you even get into the negotiation, it's asking the right questions, right? It's like coming to the agent with curiosity and asking questions in regards to what their client is expecting, what they're looking for, what their plans are, what their timeline is like having as much information as you possibly can about the other party is going to help in the negotiations that are going to eventually, of course, take place. So making sure that you're asking, asking broad questions or general questions is also not good for negotiation. Like you have to say, is your client buying something local? Do they have something under contract? What is their timeline to move? Are they already out of the home? Like asking, does your client want to sell? Like how bad do they want to sell? That's a general question. Of course they want to fucking sell. They're on the market.
I hate that question. Yeah, let's
What are you doing?
Yeah.
I don't know. Like what else in your thought?
Well, always asking what's important beyond price. I think it's really important. I'm always curious to understand how they came up with their price. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like, I just want to hear it from the agent. Like especially if I do this when I'm going to put in a lower offer. Like it's going to be kind of a lowball offer. And this is how I start. This is how I enter the conversation, right? Like, help me understand, Rachel, like how you came up with this price, right? And usually like when the price is off, I know it's off and the agent knows it's off and they blame their seller. They're like, well, that's what my seller wanted, right? Yeah. Like, okay.
Exactly.
So then the other thing that I like to do, like beyond just communicating what I'm planning to do and asking questions, I like to establish with data why I'm doing what I'm doing. And so an example of that, hey, if I'm going to submit a lower offer, I'm going to back it by comparables, right? Hey, we looked at this comp, and this comp, and that's why we gave you this number. So I'm not just throwing out a low ball that has no substance to it, but I'm showing you that we did our homework. We did the job that the listing agent really should have done. And now we're giving you the price that the market thinks this home is actually worth.
Well, and that's a great example of fair, right? Like you're saying, I'm not just coming up with this offer because my buyer feels like offering this number. We had conversation, we came to conclusion, and this is the number that they're coming to you with. And this is why.
The reason I think a lot of agents don't do this is because a lot of work, right? Of course. Like it's work to go pull comps. It's work to go get bids on stuff you're negotiating for inspections. Yep. And so they just throw numbers out there without substance, but it lands very, very different if you just say, hey, here's an offer versus here's an offer and we offer this because of X, Y, and Z.
Exactly. And so that plays into another part of the early negotiation stage, which is managing the expectations with your client, right? Like either side that you're on, if you are going in with a lowball offer or the client is like, I want to offer this. Well, tell me, explain to your client, explain to me why you want to offer that. Like what have you seen that would warrant that particular cost? Well, that's what I feel like. And that's when it's your job to say, okay, well, let's look at it from the seller's point of view. Let's look at the market climate from the seller's point of view. How many days it's been on the market, how many showings they may have had, if they've had any offers. Like now you're trying to create an environment where the client has minimal maybe, but empathy for the other party so that they can understand where the other person might come back at them. And then, of course, if you are going to be offering that, exactly what you said, managing the price conversation expectations with the listing agent, but then coming in saying, this is probably what we can expect in regards to a counter, right? Like managing the expectation, that letting them know that likely this isn't going to fly, but hey, we're going to take a swing at the ball for sure. But this is where they're probably going to come back, and this is what I would do if I was representing them.
Right. What about when you've got like a buyer who wants to offer a number that's just not going to work, and you know that, right? I had this happen the other day, and so I'm curious what you have to say about this.
So, I mean, it's case by case dependent for sure. It's a rare occasion that I won't put in an offer for a client, like at all. However, there will be times that I'll say, I'm going to tell you right now, like we could offer this. The seller's going to throw it in the trash or not even acknowledge its existence. Right. So, I don't know. What did you do?
Well, the challenge for my client is that there was comps $25,000 higher than what they were asking for this house. It was just that the timing and the market was a little bit off, and the house is priced actually really fairly. I mean, 25 grand less than the exact same house that sold 3 months ago.
Okay.
And so I knew that they were not going to respond well to it. And the number he gave, I first of all told him the number, because remember, we're negotiating with our clients just as much as we're negotiating with the other agents, sometimes even more.
Exactly.
Right? And I said, here's your number and here's why. And it was still like a big discount. It was like a $15,000 or $20,000 discount on a $700,000 house, on a home they'd just done a price reduction on too, right? Mm-hmm. And he was like, no, my gut is this number. And I said, client, I can guarantee you if you put that number out there, they're going to think you're not serious and they're not going to respond. Yeah. And then what happened? They did not respond. But the reason I still submitted that offer is because I wanted him to feel like I was still going to go try what he wanted.
Sure.
And I wanted him to get conditioned by how this market actually works.
Yeah.
I want you to know that I actually know my shit and I can predict what's going to happen before it's going to happen because of my experience, right?
100%.
Not every time, but 9 times out of 10, I probably can.
Yeah.
And what I told him was going to happen is exactly what happened.
Yeah.
And now the next offer, he followed exactly what I told him to do. He got a really sweet discount on an awesome home, and they responded and signed the offer, right? Yeah. As written.
Well, so it builds the confidence with your client that, like you said, you know what you're doing. Like, you know the market, you've seen enough, you've done enough business. You may even know the agent, so you understand how the seller's probably going to respond. Which is a huge confidence builder when it comes to working with their client.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. How about like on inspections? Because inspections, like right now, this is a really big pain point in real estate where a lot of deals are going into contract, a lot of buyers are backing out, and there's a lot of reasons behind that. Very rarely is it actually an inspection issue.
Right.
So how are you handling that?
I mean, it comes from upfront managing the expectations with the client.
Totally.
Right? Like you have to first say, an inspection is really to address and find anything that we can't visibly see with our eyes. So when you're walking through a property, if you can see that things are wrong, if you can see things are missing, if you can see the carpet needs replacing, if you can see with your eyes all these things, then the number that you're offering in that initial offer and the number that you go mutual at, right? If that contract is mutually agreed upon with terms and that number, you are accepting everything that you can see. The inspection is for all the stuff you can't see. So, people who come in and say, oh, we're going to use the inspection contingency to ask for a credit for new carpet. No, like you can see that carpet. So it's your job to make sure you're managing the expectation with your client to say, everything that we're accepting is what we can see. If something comes up that's big, so if it's a crawl space issue or a mold in the attic issue or the furnace is shot or, whatever these
mechanical structural issues.
Yeah, mechanical structural issues that you can't see walking through the property, then number one, it's, hey, first things first, everything is fixable. So first we need to figure out, let's get a couple of bids. Let's talk to a couple of contractors. What is this actually going to cost in true application? Not like throw a number at the wall and see if it sticks in negotiation. Let's do a little bit of homework. That's our job, is making sure that we are educated and educating the client throughout that process. Then when we go to respond to the client or to the seller or what, in that inspection negotiation, again, we have done our homework. We have hard numbers that we're asking for. We're not just throwing a number out at the wall.
Yeah, one of my favorite ways to manage the expectation, I talk about with our own clients, it's not only to coach them on what an inspection's for, but it's then to embed language into the contract that limits their ability to nitpick little things, right? Yes. So I'm a big fan of putting language in there for both parties' sake that the buyer won't ask for repairs unless an issue comes up that's beyond a certain dollar threshold. Oftentimes they'll use like $1,500, right? That means that they can't nitpick little shit, right? So now the message to the buyer is very clear. Hey, you don't have the right to ask for that shit, right? And it's clear to the seller too, right? This is just there to protect them from major things that we can't see, like you described. So I think it's a really, really good way to go about it.
Agree. And it's a great way to continue to build a good reputation and a relationship with other co-brokers, other co-agents in your market. Because if you say, hey, I've set the expectations with my client and they've agreed to this, and then reminding your client, hey, remember the conversation we had that we're not going to nitpick these little things. Like this little fix is only going to be $212. Like that's not something that we're going to nitpick because we agreed. We've accepted a $1,500 threshold within this inspection negotiation already. That's a huge win for both sides to already have that pre-negotiated.
Yeah, definitely. And then I also like on inspections, like you said, we're not going to just ask for dollars. We're going to substantiate dollars, right? So, hey, the inspection showed that there's a roofing issue. Let's go ahead and get a bid or two on that roofing issue. Let's trigger the additional time clause from our inspection contingency to have time to actually gather that information. And then let's go back to them with data. Because again, a data-backed negotiation approach is a lot better. Not saying, hey, I have a roof issue. I think we need about 10 grand. I'd say we got a roof issue. Here's 3 bids. One's 8, one's 10, one's 12. Let's take the one in the middle at 10.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, exactly.
And this is a big issue because now we can see the cost to do it, right? We've articulated it. It's very hard to negotiate something that's vague, right? When we have something that's very, very clear, is well articulated, that is negotiation from a position of strength.
100%. And I think that, again, going back to managing the expectations with your client and making sure that they understand what they're walking into, right? Like, especially first-time home buyers, people who haven't owned a home before, haven't owned a home in a really long time, you have to get them, like part of your job as a real estate agent is to get that person into the mindset of owning a home, and it's going to cost money, and there's going to be things that come up, and you're the one responsible for it when you own it. So making sure that you're setting them up for success from the beginning and not utilizing the inspection period as a time to negotiate credit for buying your rate down or credit to replace that carpet. Like you can tell the agents who haven't done a lot of business or the agents who don't have a ton of emotional intelligence because they will try to utilize an inspection contingency to negotiate something that they actually wanted at the beginning of the contract. And that's not a good way to negotiate. That's not a good way to represent your clients. That's not a good way to have a good reputation in the market.
Right. When somebody says you're overrepresenting your client, what does that mean?
I've experienced this a lot. So the overrepresentation of a client means that you are pushing way too hard, like irrationally too hard for things, or you're bringing things up that don't necessarily need to be a thing.
Like you're turning nothing into something, basically.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
So, I'm trying to think of a specific example. I'm sure I've got dozens of them over the last,
Well, I'm curious, when you see that happening, do you often seem that emotional control has maybe been pushed aside at the moment?
100%. So the biggest case study for overrepresentation of clients is when that agent is somewhat desperate for that commission.
What do you mean by that?
So when an agent doesn't do a ton of business or they haven't had a closing in a while and they are like banking on this particular closing, like they really need this commission,
right?
They have to have it financially, you will see a different style of agent come out in those kind of contracts. And that's when we will experience what is called, or we call, the overrepresentation of clients, when they are just asking for too many things, or they start blaming you or insulting you almost as an agent, and or insinuating that you're being dumb or irrational, or I've been called stupid before. Like those are, it's ridiculous. Like, but that's an overrepresentation of the client. Like, you do not need to represent your client so hard that you're putting the other agent down. Like, that is not a tactful negotiation standard. So I think that, the best way to negate this, the best way to make sure that this does not happen, and you do not show up with commission breath, which is essentially what overrepresentation is to make sure that you are removing emotion from the transaction, remembering that this is not about you. This is about the client. This is their home. Like, you are getting paid to do a job for that client, serving them the highest capacity and getting them the best deal with the best terms in their timeline. That's all that it's about. And if the second that it turns into being about the agent, that's when we see that overrepresentation attitude.
I think you're right. It's definitely commissions. I think there's also just sometimes agents thinking that that's what they need to do to be a good agent. And that's really not what they need to do, right?
Where do you think that comes from?
Just like it's just a lack of confidence. I think a lot of the time, like they're trying to figure out who they are as an agent, and they think that they need to be very, very aggressive, and that's what people want in a real estate agent.
Sure.
And that's really not what people want. Like, people do want aggressiveness, for sure.
Like, we're aggressive.
They want Yeah, but they don't want a fucking asshole, right? So let's separate that, right? So to me, overrepresentation is actually picking fights. Like, hey, I didn't go start this shit, but you're picking a fight with me now over something that has no basis, right? So
Well, we're going to uphold the firm fair fighter.
right. We're about to get real firm, and then it's going to turn to the fighter mode real fast here.
For sure.
All right, so let's give people some tools on what they could use. Like, let's say that, hey, there's a contract issue, and we got to deal with this issue, right? We have to go represent our client. Their best interest has now been pushed aside for whatever reason. There's a contract problem. How are we going to deal with it?
I might need like a contextual, like every time.
So let me give you one very specifically.
Okay.
Hey, Mike, the seller is taking their $15,000 chandelier with them.
Yeah. Not that this happened recently or anything. So let's be perfectly honest. Like when it comes to somebody trying to step over the boundary of what's a contractual obligation means that it's our job to uphold that boundary. So we then need to go say, like, if in Washington State where we are at, where with our contracts, if there is an item that is affixed to the property, which includes light fixtures, and it includes curtain rods, things that are literally affixed to the structure of the property, that if it is not in the excluded items portion of the contract, it conveys with the property. And I know in that particular instance, that wasn't something in the contract that they could take because it was not in the contract that it was excluded. Therefore, it has to be included in the contract. So in a very timely manner, I believe you are able to take the snippet out of the contract, show that's exactly like what's included with the conveyance of that property. And you have to go to bat for them and say, you have to call that other agent out. And you have to say, actually, unfortunately for your client, if they had wanted that as part of, the contract to be excluded, they should have written that in. Unfortunately, they didn't make it into the contract, so that's going to stay on the property as per the contract right here.
Right. Yeah. I mean, in that instance, that exactly what you just described. Our job is to manage contracts once we're under contract, right? Like we have to make sure there's accountability to both sides. A lot of that is holding our own clients accountable, but of course we got to keep the other side accountable as well. And so when someone steps out of alignment with that contract, you do have to push them back into line, right? But you don't have to be a dick about it.
No.
Right? You got to say, hey, here's what the contract says. Here is what you're asking to do. And this is why it's a problem.
Yep.
Right. And we're not going to do that.
Exactly. Well,
just very clear. We're not going to do that.
Exactly. And I think this is where a lot of agents, there might be emotion tied into that, or where their emotional control will be out of whack, and they'll come back and be like, you can't do that. Like they'll flare up about it, as opposed to just saying, hey, I'm going to continue to remove this emotion because this is contractual. This is cut and dry. It really is. So making sure that you do not infuse emotion into those times, and you're able to factually, logically represent your client, upholding that contract, making sure that they're following it, just like you said. Like that. That's how you maintain composure and continue to represent your client in a positive way.
Right. One of the most underrated, and I think a lot of people don't even think about this weapon in the arsenal of tools we have for negotiating, is the weapon of time.
Yeah.
Time is fucking powerful, right? How can I slow things down? Why do you think that's such a powerful weapon? Why is it so misunderstood and underutilized?
So this is something that I coach a lot of people on, a lot of agents on our team, a lot of agents that I mentor. In regards to really tough negotiations, or when things tend to get heightened, right? If the other agent tends to get emotional and things start to get a little bit heated, by taking a step back, by slowing down the cadence of communication, by changing the medium of communication. And by that, I mean, if you're in a text conversation back and forth and you can see it's getting heated, picking up the phone and calling them immediately. Like call them, get voice to voice as soon as possible. Or if they won't pick up the phone, which has happened to me a lot of times, right? In that instance, not responding to them, giving them a couple of hours, right? If it's not an intensely time sensitive, it's not 8:59, you have to have an answer in a minute. Like give them a couple of hours to kind of cool down, then call them, change the medium, come back to the table and see if they'll come back with a lowered emotional state. Being able to build in some of that time into negotiations is such an incredible tool because it allows people to step back, or it forces them, pushes them to step back and objectively look at the situation. And honestly, 9 times out of 10, that person will have either kind of figured out or they will self-realize how they got emotional. And I've had people apologize for outbursts before in that kind of instance. And so it gives them a second to kind of reflect on the situation and say, is this really how I want to show up?
Time is giving somebody the gift of perspective.
100%.
Right? It really is.
Well, really well put. Yeah.
Like it's giving them the chance to push the emotions aside, calm the fuck down. Really think about it. Like, is this really a big deal? Like, is what we're about to go to war on really going to matter in 2 or 3 years? And 99.9% of the time, it's not.
Right.
So I like to give people the whole night, right? Like, hey, I'll get back to you tomorrow. In the meantime, go like chill out, calm the fuck down.
You don't say.
No, this is what I'm thinking, right? Like, I'm not saying anything because I'm using time, right?
I was gonna say like, that's gonna flame the file.
I don't ever get the text like you get the text. Like no one fucking sends me shit like that. But if I get like a heightened voicemail, I will often wait till the next day to return the call.
Yeah.
And I do that with clients when it's a non-emergent kind of call.
Yep.
And I do it with the other agents as well, because people, they do gain perspective, right? And they also come up with solutions to what seemed like a big problem. And now all of a sudden it's like not even an issue. Exactly. I had a client who was like 6-7 years ago. They were always drinking around 7 o'clock every night. And they would call me every night around 7:30. And there would always be some huge issue going on, right? And I just decided, I was like, I'm going to see what happens if I call them back the next morning around 8 o'clock, right? And every morning that I would do that, I'd call them back. They're like, oh, yeah, it's no big deal. Never mind. Don't worry about it.
Exactly. I remember that.
Giving them the gift of perspective, but also the gift of sobriety.
Yeah. And that's really nice, especially some agents. Sorry. I mean, shoot.
Right. So I think time is like, man, if you could take that from this podcast and you understand how to harness the power of that weapon, that could be super powerful into changing your game.
It's so good. I'm so using that. Like time is giving someone the gift of perspective.
Yeah.
Epic. That's
Powerful.
What we did.
Yeah. Awesome. Anything else that we need to give people?
I think you get like that one thing with time is so incredibly key for sure. But again, going back to managing the expectations, like I think, speaking in absolutes with other agents, but also with your clients, like don't promise things that you can't fulfill on. Don't make absolute statements that, is going to jeopardize either your client side or the other side. Don't use ultimatums with people. Like they're just, you have like being firm, being fair, and being a fighter are the best ways to maintain a good status in your market as well as be a good agent overall. But also increasing your level of emotional intelligence and your emotional control is the best way to become a good negotiator.
Awesome. So go read Chris Voss's book if you haven't yet.
Yep.
Deploy some of these tools in your next negotiation with your clients or with your other agents. Let us know how it goes. If you got questions, put them down below. We'll answer them on another podcast in the future.
Yep.
If you want to connect with us, we are at meetthenovaks.com. You can learn more about coaching with us on there. You can learn about Real. You can learn about our real estate team. There's all sorts of cool shit to check out on there. I'm at The Real Mike Novak on Instagram as well.
And I am at Rachael Novak.
We'll see you next week.